In this lesson, we are going to examine how to create a base flange. A base flange is the first feature in a new sheet metal part. And when you add a base flange to a Solidworks part, the part is then designated as a sheet metal part. To access the base flange command, we can go to the pull-down menu Insert, Sheet Metal, Base Flange, or we can simply right mouse click on an existing tab and select Sheet Metal. Going into the Sheet Metal Command Manager, notice we have many commands specific to sheet metal design. However, at this time, only 2 commands are available to us. And in this lesson, we're covering base flange, so I'm going to go ahead and select it. The very first thing I am prompted for is to select a plane on which to create a sketch. This is similar to the extrude command, where you create a sketch first, then you complete the extrude. So I'm going to go ahead and select the right plane, go to my line tool, and draw a simple U shape. I'll then apply a couple smart dimensions. We'll make this leg 25, along with this leg, and the bottom we'll set to 75. I'm going to add a relation between the midpoint and the origin of coincidence. Now, before I close out of the sketch, I do want to mention that I did not place any radiuses in the sketch, nor did I apply any thickness to the sketch. That will be taken care of inside of the Property Manager for base flange. So let's go ahead and close out of the sketch. Property Manager appears. Very first thing in the Property Manager is extrude distance. I'm going to change this to midplane and apply a distance of 100 millimeters. And notice the preview on the screen update. The next item in the Property Manager is sheet metal thickness. Right now it's set to 1.5. Let's change this to 2.5. And below sheet metal thickness, I have a reverse direction. This will apply the sheet metal thickness of 2.5 to the inside or outside of the sketch. Keep an eye on this area here. Right now the 2.5 is applied to the outside of the sketch. I'm going to go ahead and check that box. And now notice the 2.5 is applied to the inside of the sketch. I'll uncheck it, and now it's back to the outside. I'll leave it to the outside. The next item in the Property Manager is bend radius. Let's change this to a bend radius of 3. And what's important to know here is the bend radius is always the inside radius. Moving on down the Property Manager, I have bend allowance. The bend allowance is nothing more than a measurement of how much extra material is required to accommodate a bend in a sheet metal part. Now I do have some choices here under this drop-down box of bend table, K-factor, bend allowance, bend deduction, and bend calculation. We're going to cover these in more detail in a later lesson. So I'm going to leave it at the default value of K-factor of 0.5. I also have an option for auto relief. Even though auto relief is not needed in the part I have on the screen currently, sometimes when you put a bend in a part, you need a relief cut in order for that bend to take place. And that's what this portion of the Property Manager is used for. And some of our options is a relief cut of rectangular, tear, and obround. And we'll cover these in a later lesson as we apply more features to the part that we have on the screen. Now before I close out of the Property Manager, notice I do have a drop down here for sheet metal gauges. And if I select it, I now have an option for Use Gauge Table. So I'm going to go ahead and put a check mark there, click in the drop down. Solidworks provides a handful of default sample tables. So for example, if I select Sample Table Aluminum, in the Property Manager, instead of specifying a thickness, a bend radius, a K-factor, that's taken care of by this table. All I need to do at this point is to select a gauge thickness. So if I select a gauge thickness of 14, notice the thickness, bend radius, bend allowance, those values are inputted based on that table. But you always have the option of overriding those values. I'm going to go back and uncheck the gauge table and use the settings I applied earlier. So this should be 2.5. And we want an inside radius of 3. And like I mentioned before, we're going to leave the K factor at 0.5. I'm going to close out of the base flange command. And we have a simple sheet metal part on the screen. Now let's take a look at the feature manager tree. By creating that base flange, we have a couple new features in the tree. We have a cut list, which we'll talk about later. We have our base flange command, but we also have a feature called sheet metal. And then we have one that's currently suppressed called flat pattern. Now if I edit the base flange that we were just in, notice I don't have all of the values or inputs I had originally. All I have is the extrude, and notice my sheet metal thickness and my inside bend radius is grayed out. So what happened to those other values? Well, let's go ahead and close out of the base flange command and edit the sheet metal feature. Because those values for bend radius, sheet metal thickness, and bend allowance pertain to the entire sheet metal part, Solidworks places them under this sheet metal feature. So this is where you can make the changes for those items. I'm going to go ahead and close out of the sheet metal feature. And the last one here is flat pattern. If I expand the flat pattern, notice I can right mouse click and I can unsuppress, which basically unfolds the sheet metal part on the screen. Now notice we have these center lines represented here on the unfolded part. These are referred to as bend lines. These are great for dimensioning to if you need to provide a drawing in a flattened state. Now to place this part back in its bent state, we simply go back and suppress. Because we need to do this on a regular basis, we actually have an icon for this. Flatten. And notice when you select it and unselect it, the part flattens and unflattens. And this completes our lesson for base flange.